The recording. Okay, good evening, everybody. And thank you all for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today's date is Tuesday, February 18th, and this is session A of the BCDC Design Subcommittee. The Planning Department continues to host public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. I am Seth Reisman, Deputy Director of Design Review at the City of Boston Planning Department. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that the Commission staff is making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. For purposes of the record, the following commissioners are present. Commissioner Kotaridis, Commissioner Lubenow, Commissioner Morris, and Commissioner Solano. Catherine Morris, I saw that you just joined. I'm going to be elevating you to co-host now. Okay, tonight's agenda will include a presentation for 262 St Botolph Street, Fenway, also known as the Multipurpose Athletic Center associated with the Northeastern University 10-year IMP. Tonight's meeting procedures will follow the typical BCDC subcommittee meeting format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent, comments from BCDC commissioners, and public testimony. A proposed project at this location is seeking Article 80B large project entitlement associated with the application for Article 80D IMP entitlement for the 10-year institutional master plan for Northeastern University, and contemplates the demolition of the existing Matthews Arena and development of approximately 290,000 square feet of university use in a single building on an approximately 2.25 acre site. This will be the third presentation of the proposed project to the subcommittee, following an introduction on June 25th, monthly meeting, and subsequent design subcommittee meetings on August 20th and October 22nd. It is my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves. A reminder to proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes, and I will give presenters a halftime and 2-minute warning. And with that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever ready.
I'll just take less than a minute because I haven't been at the previous meetings and just want to make sure I'm introducing myself. Kathy Spiegelman. I'm the Vice President for Planning, Real Estate, and Facilities at Northeastern, and it is my team that is supporting this project, and we'll use the 15 minutes for Brian and the Perkins and Will team to share where we are, an update from the previous meetings, and then we're all here to answer questions. So thank you.
Thank you all. This is I'm Brian Schabel. I'm a design director at Perkins and Will. Happy to be part of this. And again, this is our third meeting with the subcommittee, and I want to start by acknowledging that the comments that have been made have really led to a lot of progress that we, the design team, and the client have really found to be improvements in the process and the design. So we'll address a series of these comments and suggestions by showing progress on the primary campus entries, in addition to the more thorough representation of the design in a greater context as was requested, as well as some open space updates. First, as a brief reminder of the program, this is an arena for events, including hockey, basketball, and convocation, combined with the significant recreation elements of basketball, fitness, and a large flexible roof turf area, as well as men's and women's basketball team spaces. To fit in the site, we have stacked these many elements in a unique way, including some long spans on top of each other. We've shifted the masses where appropriate and achievable to enliven the massing and relate to the adjacent context and maximize public outdoor space. The outdoor space creates covered queuing spaces for the events, winter sports as a focus, as well as expanded public realm with integrated seating and landscape elements, which we will go through later. This is a really interesting combination of programs, and one they're really aware of. We're not really aware of a precedent on an urban site like this. So we're really excited to highlight this combination and are intentionally wrapping the building with a continuous ribbon of masonry. We have broken down the facade with fenestration that allows light and views at strategic locations while maintaining our strong sustainable goals. We're shooting towards net zero energy as well as living building core challenge. We've added additional detailing in the masonry with solar fins in key locations, as well as pops of warmth in the window detailing and other elements to further break it down. And the mass, curved corners, and details, as well as some new developments highlighting the anticipated high-use stairways, relate to and echo the movement and activity within the project. So to start with, we'd like to show the design in a bit more context and in different lighting and weather conditions to address some of the comments we heard. This is a view that you've seen before, slightly tweaked from the St Botolph and Gainsborough corner and really the main entry. The deep cuts are very evident here in the massing to break down the scale. And here you can also see we've added warmer elements and enlarged the height of some of the fenestration to give you a slightly more open scale. While we still prefer the manganese iron spot that we presented, we have done a lot to make the building lighter and more welcoming in other ways. More transparency where relevant, more playful compositions, which you can see throughout the presentation, and more warmth and accents, as well as playing with the sheen and reflectivity of the materials. Here you can see a night view that really highlights the transparencies of the lobbies, the fitness spaces, and of the main concourse, which you'll see actually in other images, that really will pop at night when most of the events actually occur. So we think this is a great benefit and really warm and inviting as well. In a gray or even snowy weather, we're still confident in the mass, and the sheen of the brick allows for an interesting dynamism in all conditions. It will be bright sometimes, it will be dark in other times, in which we feel this adds interest throughout the day and throughout the seasons that you'll experience the building in. We've added some images from further out to see in a larger context as suggested as well. Here is a view from Huntington and Gainsborough, and you can see in many of these images we have dashed in the anticipated mass being suggested in the institutional master plan over the existing conditions. So you can see what's anticipated right now. I'm going through the city in this process. Here's a view from farther west on Gainsborough, basically coming from the campus. So again, you can see future planned development here and the scale of our project in its context. Again, from across Mass Ave over the Mass Ave T-stop, you can see we're actually, coincidentally, I would say, picking up some of the curves on the building, but I would also say that we're picking up some of the curves of the Boston fabric and the bow windows, which I think is important and has been part of our discussions from the beginning. So the design has evolved throughout in detail, but we have addressed a few key locations that you've commented on in a larger scale. The first is the south facade, and in particular, the southwest corner. This is what we showed you last time, and there was a request to break this down more and add a bit more scale to the elements. There's a little bit of consistency that I think we could be worked upon. This demonstrates our suggested progress and updates. We have added a lot more variety to the fenestration on this side, and additionally, we have looked for more ways to highlight and actually encourage the movement through the building. We replanned the core in this corner to allow for added glazing within a stair that really we see as the main vertical circulation for the rec components throughout the building as they walk up. It adds a very different scale to the building than what you saw previous slide and encourages and highlights the movement throughout the building. We anticipate this corner stairway being a popular means to navigate the rec spaces. Additionally, at the base of the building, we've added a dark base and separated that from a strip of glazing to give more scale at the pedestrian experience, but also bring light into the hockey lounges and locker rooms, which would obviously be obscured. The next slide is a sort of a raised elevational view demonstrating the variety of scales of openings as the strategy to enlarge the perception of the openings with directional curving masonry jambs leads into the opening. So you can see in this side and also on the St. Botolph side, we're sort of sliding in as we've shown in the past to extend the dimension of these apertures. And I want to add here that the planning for the arena really fits in a way that sort of the restrooms and many concessions are on this side to allow for the St. Botolph transparency on the main con. You'll see that later, as well as the upper con, which has some windows into the hospitality areas. This slide is from Carter Fields that you're looking at here, again, addressing how this scale move makes a difference from afar as well. And then finally, a view from the T-stop as best we can. This is a view from the T-stop looking towards that south facade. Again, the variety of scale of the windows, as well as the stairway, which is being coordinated to it will be better aligned with this opening, but really enlivening, providing views out as you walk up and daylight in. So we think these differences have been substantial, and we hope you're liking those. To further demonstrate the scale of the building in the context, here are some views of a model which we've actually been utilizing in our studies leading up throughout the whole design. Shown here in the dashed lines is, again, the IMP masses as well as the planned residential high-rise on Huntington to the north. This demonstrates the scale and relationship of the spaces between the buildings, as well as indicating a green roof on the west and north sides, which will add a little detail in this conversation as we move forward through the presentation. It should also be noted here that we are planning for a full PV array covering the majority of the upper roof, as well as a series of skylights to bring daylight to the core of the large long span spaces. Lynn, you want to take it from here?
We're at about halftime.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks. I'm Lynn Giesica, principal of Studio 2112 Landscape Architecture, and I just want to talk about how we've related the landscape concept to the building itself. So we really see this as an echo of not only the form language coming off of the building, but what the program of the building is doing and how it begins to deploy in the landscape. The landscape is very programmatically driven. And as we start to look at this, we understand that there's a core of activity, right, that relates inside the building. We're taking that program and pulling it to the outside. So that first lamination of landscape, which is under the overhang on a day-to-day basis, that's really movement and occupation, both on the Gainsborough side and on the St Botolph side, where the column line fits on the Gainsborough side, and then that edge of the public realm, that's our porous edge, and then we move out to the greater public realm context. So what really pivots for us is when we go to an event day, that first lamination, that first echo there really needs to become cueing and movement. So that's been a big programmatic driver in what we can and can't do in this space in the landscape. So if we go forward, what we're really doing here is you start to see in the landscape how the pavement patterns, fixed benches, other elements really take a hint from the form language of the building, and it starts to deploy out in different fashions. And so the pavement also really helps guide you to the various doors. But what's happening is that between the column line and the face of the building on Gainsborough, that needs to be our queuing zone for major events. So we need to really provide a lot of flexibility in that space so that we can have those queuing events happen, but on a day-to-day basis, there's still fixed benches and furnishings in there, but they work with that flow of the queuing. So that's really been a big driver for us. And then we look at the St. Botolph side. If you go back one, Brian, for one second, please.
Right.
If we go to the St. Botolph side, we also have queuing at that auxiliary entry and the east entry. So you'll see where the landscape elements begin to deploy. They support the queuing movement, but they still have activity on a day-to-day basis. So now if we go forward, we start to see what this looks like in 3 dimensions. We've really tried to pull the dynamic aspects of, movement and athleticism that are happening in the building to be these kind of ribbons of granite benches that push and pull. We've worked to add warm materials to make it a little more friendly and inviting. So we have wood tops on the granite benches. And then we also have age-friendly universal seating types in our pods that we've created. They have backs, they're wood, they have armrests also. So this really starts to show you between the column line here and the face of the building that can support queuing. We've tested it. So on a day-to-day basis, you still have fixed areas in there, so movement and occupation can happen. But when we have major events, those pavement patterns actually help define the lines of queuing areas. This is just another view. I know Brian's going to talk a little bit about how the massing relates to what's going to happen in the future with the IMP, but this is looking back towards the T, and you start to see this kind of layered condition. We have the bollards here. Security has been, safety of the people in the plaza has been something that we've all been paying quite a lot of attention to. But you see the main entry and the main door here in the dynamics of those kind of flowing benches.
Go ahead.
And then this is the view. Our back is to the T here. We are able to have one raised planter. We get good, nice south light here. And so we're working with the team on what's the most appropriate aspect, but we can get some small trees in there. We're working with Northeastern on the idea of a crevice garden, but you start to see where the pods start to define the end of those queuing lines between the column and the face of the building. So the rec entry always has clear access. Then we have our porous edge and our access to the public realm on the left-hand side.
Oops.
This is a closer view. You start to see how the language of the wood tops from the granite benches relate to our seating pods, and that'll pull around to the north side too of when we start to look at St Botolph. But you get a great view into the lobby and still provide active seating on a day-to-day basis, but that queuing area is really protected between the column line and the face of the building when that happens. But there's a lot of fun things that are out here in the landscape every day.
The one thing I want to add here is this line, if you'll follow my cursor, is really the line where the curtain wall meets the ceiling. So we have had this warm mirrored ceiling that we've talked about before, but we've really tried to enhance this, have sort of a knife edge at the perimeter so it is an abstraction, but really trying to have something that fully engages the public as they enter.
About 2 minutes left.
Okay, we got a cruise. Okay.
So on this side, Brian will be showing a little bit more studies about what our branding element is here, but we have the wood. So there's a lot of materiality consistency between what's happening on St. Botolph and Gainsborough, but they kind of deploy in a little bit of a different fashion.
Yeah, again, one thing I talked about before is the transparency of the main concourse. So this curtain wall up above is really the main concourse. We'll have a lot of activity on the interior.
So we do have a green roof on level 5. The roof terrace we can talk about briefly here. If you go forward, Brian, this is really meant to be used by Northeastern for, we see this as a breakout space for, yoga and other types of activities there. But there is a green roof, so there's occupiable space, and then there's also extensive green roof around the edge.
Okay, we have 4 more slides and one more topic. Finally, we want to show the improvements we've made to the northeast corner, which faces Mass Ave. So though it's not really the primary entry and not intended to be the primary, and it's not on a primary street, I would say, we agree that there's an opportunity here to add interest and become more welcoming. So this is what you saw before and what we are proposing. So we have replanned the area in this corner as well, so that within this glass mass, it contains a sculptural stair that not only leads to the main and upper concourse, including the student sections, but also up the full height of the building to the top floor where the basketball team spaces are. So we anticipate this being used all the way. So in recognizing that, reworking that, we found an opportunity to really open up a slot of glass all the way up the building, which really highlights that space, again, makes it more welcoming and interesting. We've also extended the iconography that you saw in the main entry, where the black wall with the branding element, again, leads to and provides a wayfinding for the entry. Here's a view of it at night. You can see this right now. What we're showing is a red stair poking through, and it will weave up the building within this volume that we, again, think is really enlivening the space and the experience of going to a game or event after hours. Finally, the last view, here's from Mass Ave, showing this in overall context from this view, again, with the IMP mass in the background. Overall, we think the design and the site are very unique, and we've taken into account the comments and suggestions to make this facility really appreciated from afar in its massing, from the approach and its articulation, and when adjacent in its details, its pops of warmth, reflectivity, and the development of its public space. So we want to thank you again for all the comments you've made and led to this better improvements of the design. And we hope you're addressing them and that they're well received. So that's it. We'll open up the discussion.
Thank you, team, and I'll turn it over to the commissioners now. We do not have one of the co-chairs on this evening, so I guess I'd like to ask Anne, Catherine, Anne Marie, Catherine, Kathy, and Laura, whoever would like to dive in, please do so.
I'm happy to jump in. Could you go back one slide?
Yep.
So again, thank you for the additional information. I think I still am interested. I guess one of the challenges, or one of the things I'm struggling with, is I understand the program of the building. You've very clearly articulated the intent, your design intent, whether it's the architecture or the landscape. What I do not understand is how the building, how the project, including the architecture and the landscape architecture, relate and respond to the surrounding context. And I asked you to go to this slide specific. No,
This
the
one?
previous slide. Yes. Well, actually, both these slides
Yep.
illustrate the diversity of the surrounding context, including the materials, the palettes, and I really appreciate the attention to the design of the brick and the articulation of the brick in your design. I think it's something I really like the texture of it, but it is all very monotone in a lot of ways and has a very distinct attitude that almost isolates itself from the surrounding context. And one thing I don't recall seeing in this presentation or the previous one I was involved in, is just kind of an analysis of the surrounding context. Do you have something like that available?
We do, and could probably present for a long time on this. So let me try to find out some of the slides that I think you're probably referring to. And so I need to switch screens.
And you could also discuss it, but it's just something that, as a commissioner serving on this commission, I
Yep.
just always like to think about, as an architect, an urban planner, and designer, how this relates. And I think while it's, not immediate, you're very close to the South End. You are, there's other interesting architecture happening, whether it's the New England Conservatory, and just think, I just look for that richness of, how you respond to that.
Yeah, and
because each and the campus, the intent of the campus design as a whole.
Right, and I'll start with this slide, and the campus has always been decidedly different, I think, than the immediate context. It has been. It started with these, and then continues even to this day to have a very rich and diverse fabric that is established of architectural styles and materiality. I will say that this is a very extremely diverse area for materiality, and then you can see that here. And I think there is a consistency of some materiality especially when you look at the South End. But I would say there's a much more, as soon as you pass through Mass Ave into the campus along St. Botolph in particular, or anywhere on the campus, actually, there's a decidedly different materiality that we've acknowledged and discussed in the past. I also think that this view in particular, I keep going back to, is this context is unique. It's not for a space like this. It's not a huge arena, so the site is very appropriate. It's got great access, but it's not on St. Botolph, or it's not on Mass Ave, and it's not on Huntington. It's one step removed. So in our response, it doesn't really want to just it wants to be a lot more subtle than maybe another arena would in a different location, because it doesn't really have that super public front, I would say. So that's one of the reasons that's led to that. From a standpoint of the architecture, I would say that I'll climb back here. I mean, we picked up some of the softness of some of these corners in an abstract way. And again, I think there is some, except for the brick detailing throughout the South End, we have picked up some of these with just subtle, I would say, abstract curves. And as you go into it, we've acknowledged some of the warmth. This is not a great example of the view, but we've acknowledged some of the warmth through this sort of champagne color and the detailing and the soffits that happen throughout, as well as the texture. So in my opinion, there's a diverse set of palettes to relate to or not relate to, but there's a lot going on in this area. We're trying to actually purposefully wrap this in a more holistic or continuous ribbon.
And can you just clarify the public access? I thought I understood from previous presentations that this is intended to have some community benefit. I just want to make sure I understand that.
Absolutely will. This is a lot, obviously it's holding events that the community will use. Certainly the university community as well for the rec, but I think it's in its program in itself, it's going to be more of a public facing space for hockey games, for basketball. So what I meant by the public access is, I think this would be an entirely different design challenge if it was on Mass Ave and or Huntington Avenue. It's one step removed, I think.
I'd also just like to add that it's going to be a complete transformation along Gainsborough Street for the streetscape and all of that. I mean, there's nothing there now with respect to street trees or anything along those lines. So having a larger overhang covered space is an amenity that does not exist today, in addition to any street trees or streetscape along that side.
Okay, thank you. I'm seeing a little bit differently when I'm looking at Google Earth View, but I'm going to let my fellow commissioners chime in. Thank you.
Well, I'll just add, because I agree with those comments, but there's so much about this building that I like at a close-up range on the articulation of the brick and such. I appreciate that you've toned down the color, or you've warmed up the or created new tonal changes through some warmer color choices. And yet I think it can go further. And I'm particularly still concerned about the edge that you were just showing us. I think this view is very lovely and faces into the campus and suggests that this is the substantial point of entry. Thank you for that. This still feels like a back door, and rather than an edge that is your first point of access when you're arriving down this particular street. And while I appreciate what you've done with the vertical element that you've installed, I think it continues to perpetuate a darkness that I think this corner does not need any more of. I think that I guess I wonder if this vertical element might be a point at which you might assert a complementary but a distinctive color contrast, or I mean, I don't mean a big color contrast, but something either a material or something else that creates a little bit more lightness and opportunity to welcome, or something that suggests a door opening here. And please don't take me literally. I mean,
Yeah, I understand.
So it just feels, I appreciate what you've done. I think it helps. But I think the darkness takes away from the success of it.
Yeah, this is something we've looked at a lot together, and we're going to continue to discuss.
But I liked your nighttime view with the red stairs standing out. Now, I don't know that it will ever be exactly like that, but I think that, again, this is during the day. This corner needs something to say you've arrived and you're welcome here.
And maybe Commissioner Kotaritis, if I could ask a question, maybe while we're on this corner, Brian, I'm wondering if you could take us a little bit through the logic of why you chose to put the sort of break where you did, the vertical element.
Sure.
Did you explore looking at it, on the St. Botolph side where there is that sort of, the existing threshold today? And I know you're changing the access routes from what we have in the current arena.
Yep.
but a statement that's maybe a little bit more frontal or visible on St. Botolph.
I mean, there's a number of reasons. One, I would say, just to clarify, and I think it sounds like everybody understands this, but just you're actually entering this. It's a little weird because you want to walk around this sort of, I'll call it a vestibule or a lobby, and enter from the other side, which allows for the queuing as opposed to what is there right now. You're basically queuing in the street, right? It's very difficult. So we're trying to achieve that, which is what Lynn was going after. We have explored opening this corner more, actually completely. We've explored pulling this all the way back, but what happens is it compositionally, it looked very strange. We rendered that, we modeled it. It lacks the continuity of the concept. And it actually, in my mind, it again hints that you're entering, becomes basically a very frontal entry off of St. Botolph, as opposed to, I mean, right now we're mediating between the east and the west ends and trying to not want people to enter on the east or the north side. So really trying to grab people on the other. It's a challenge. I'm not disagreeing, and we've scrutinized this a lot, probably the most since the last meeting, trying to come up with many different options to consider. So in my opinion, it looked very awkward when we pulled this back to that whole lobby. I think this will be an amazing space in here. And I think the desire we've discussed to try to maintain some curves is what's holding this edge here. But we've looked at several other options, and I appreciate the comments. I do think, again, because of the challenge, it kind of wants to be an entry and kind of doesn't want to be an entry from this view, but you want to be hinted at the opportunity to enter and go up a stairway. That was what's led to this.
Well, you want to draw people towards the building, correct?
Right. Yes.
I think that's kind of what Kathy, your comment, I think that's a comment that I raised in a previous meeting, was just how to, because you've created such a distinctive object with your architecture, and you've been very consistent in the way you've approached it. I'm looking for, that's, again, it's distinctive, it's memorable, but I'm just looking for those cues, from a planning perspective, from a pedestrian perspective, that signal, this is where that entrance is. And in part because the landscape, I would agree, the context is, there is a lot of variation within the existing context, which I think is something that makes it, which can create a lot of visual interest, but then it can also be disruptive or confusing.
Yep.
So I think all the more reason that maybe it's about signaling, come here, whether or not it's, this is where we want you to enter the building.
Could we look at the plan? I think that's slide 29. And can you explain how
Yeah, let me go to
you have one before that. Can you explain how the entries work a little bit? And
certainly. So there are actually, I would say, 4 entries to the building, 3 of which are sort of event mode. Okay. So we think the majority, since it's a university building, we really prioritize the main entry to be off of Gainsborough and St. Botolph, off of this corner. So the main entry, you can follow my cursor, is right here. So there's queuing, and we've laid out the number of people. These are actually each individual that we anticipate for the flows that we need. The queuing goes along in a series of lanes that enters here to go into the event. The rec entry is down here, and during non-events, it may be through both entries, but it leads to the same space. Auxiliary entry here is for hospitality spaces. That is a smaller, more discreet entry with its own stairway up and its own or a shared elevator. And then the east entry, which is secondary. Anybody can go in there, but we are gearing towards the sort of the new doghouse being at this end. And so we anticipate mostly students coming in here that will be familiar with the building and coming up and going up to the upper con and feeding down into the doghouse.
so this is event queuing, which is really helpful to see, but in the day-to-day, where is circulation going to happen?
So there, again, the main entry has the possibility, it's an operational decision by the university, but it has a possibility to also be the rec entry with a secured stairway that would otherwise lead to the event space. So we see this entire thing potentially being a rec lobby. If not, it's a smaller rec lobby that goes straight into the rec core. The remaining two entries are more likely just athletes, student athletes. So hockey and basketball athletes would be able to utilize the other entries as well.
So there wouldn't be as much activity on St. Botolph, is that right?
Not
on the day-to-day basis.
Not from a queuing standpoint. I do feel that this is still a potential to allow for public space, public use of the hardscape there, but that's the intent.
Yeah, what would draw people to that area? I mean, I think that the elevation that you've shown on Gainsborough is really strong, and I think has come a long way, particularly with the addition of the wood fins. But what will draw people here?
So this, again, I think there's two things that we're planning here, and we're working on that for upcoming presentations internally. But this red zone is a placeholder for storytelling, and we're anticipating there's a lot of events that have happened in the existing Matthews Arena that are interesting and important, ranging from the Doors to Muhammad Ali to presidential speeches, as well as some interesting history to the building itself that is standing there. More specifically, I would say to what was there originally. So there's a zone behind this. We'll call it cliche, but we'll call it an Instagram moment, the Husky sign here that we're working on as well. But the goal is for this to add interest for someone to engage and learn about the history of the place. There's additional seating elements along the stretch of this as well. And
then what's behind this facade?
That facade is locker rooms down below. I mean, it's really, there's been, since the beginning, we looked for opportunities to get daylight down there and break it up, but it really has no desire to have any daylight or windows in there. And there's certainly privacy issues. There's also, some rigid structure there to help with lateral loads as well, going in the east-west dimension or direction.
And remind us what the materials are in that facade behind the branding?
So this is a metal panel with a granite base, dark granite base. And then up above, these are actually warm metal fins that are, in this case, they're not doing much performatively because it's on sort of the north-ish side and on the underneath the overhang, but we are trying to add some rhythm to this. So we have a sort of a butt glaze system here with a fin on every other one to give it a little more texture and scale. And then
it's an interesting question about what will happen on St. Botolph. Right now, it's a parking lot. And across the street, I think New England Conservatory, they got a federal grant. They spent a lot of money on trying to make the sidewalk wide and have seating. There's never anybody there. You know, it's a dormitory. It's got a food service on the first floor, but there isn't a lot of activity here except for the flow of people going back and forth to the New England Conservatory or the Northeastern campuses. So I think the history part is likely to be of interest during queuing, but the question is, can we put something sculptural or interesting in the space that might entice people to think about it as a public place to sit or be instead of just pass through?
Can I circle back on something? And it has to do with that corner for St. Botolph and Mass Ave, where you all had changed. Yes, that one.
Yep.
I have a question, and that is just thinking about folks who come to the facilities outside the students using those facilities. And most people know to come from Mass Ave and turn onto St. Botolph. Is this the impression? Is this the first thing that you want them to see that will guide them to be excited about entering into the building? Because currently, as is, it does not feel that way. Like the amount of energy spent on the entranceway, this is the first impression someone's going to get when they turn onto that street. That may affect if they want to go any further down. So I'm asking that question because it does affect the things it sounds like you all will work on about how to address this. But that's the overall question I have about, is this the first impression you want to make coming from that Mass Ave side, turning on to St. Botolph, moving forward?
Well, I mean, from my standpoint, I think it is engaging. It sounds like there's work to be done based on the comments I'm hearing, which I appreciate. But I do think as you come off of the T and you're coming around, there is interest here. I mean, there's transparency, whether it's daytime or nighttime. There is activity here, and certainly I think the articulation of not only the curves but the texture are intriguing. I mean, you look at the context. I think there's some play, some abstractions of some of that in the context, and I think I do think it's intriguing. I mean, I understand there's maybe a desire to look at opening it up more, which we can talk about, but I do. It is intentional, I guess, is to answer your question directly.
Brian, it would be helpful if we could look at where the building was in October, sort of facade by facade, and that can be done in perspectives for sure. These views of before and after.
Yeah, we have before and after of this one.
Yeah, can we go all the way around the building and then we'll come back and talk about specific ones?
This one is, I'll tell you what's changed in this. We've raised this a little bit to get this whole datum a little bit to get as much light as we can, and then we hit the slab, so it becomes kind of pointless to go any farther and more expensive and more difficult. But I think we've raised this datum here that enlivens that. We have added some more texture throughout the building as well that we think addresses that. I don't have the before, but conceptually, I think this is pretty similar to what it was, except for maybe the texture up on top.
And Brian, I think that this is probably one of the most successful elevations and changes. To my memory, certainly that side has really lightened up and has a great forward face for the campus as you head towards the campus.
Yep.
So let's see this one.
So this is the before. There was a lot more solidity down here, and there was what I interpreted as some of the comments is breaking it down and not having sort of the consistency here, and also dealing with the base a little bit more. A little bit better. So what we've done is we've reworked the planning of this to allow for the better utilization of adding more glass here. And we've sort of combined some elements to make bigger moves to really address different scales of moves on this facade, as well as the base. So we've added a base here that's darker. Will take a beating, but it's not the whole thing coming to the ground. There's been discussions about that in the past as well. I can't remember who mentioned this in particular, but it's something we wanted to address here as well.
Actually, if you could pause on this image, sorry, just what you just described about what you did in terms of the broader elevation, I just encourage you to think about how you can take that and address it at a pedestrian scale. You know, at the base of the building. So I think you've been successful. I think you've been successful in addressing some of our earlier comments about how you break down the scale of the overall mass. And don't go back. I'm not asking you to go back to other slides right now. I'm just trying to add a layer of commentary to addressing, because everything, you know, how you address the pedestrian scale, the design of the pedestrian scale of the building.
Right. And this is the kind of a partial elevation of St Botolph. And I think there's a lot going on here that does engage it between the landscape, which I think is actually out of date in this particular image. But this, whatever this element becomes, as well as the story, whether it's a big graphic or it's actually, you want to get close and read it if you haven't already. But I do think there is a lot of attention that we've had. We haven't presented it maybe in this look at because we had in the past. Is this what you're discussing, or do you mean other parts of the building?
But you're showing us, so many of the images that you're showing us are of a very large scale building facade. And I just encourage you to think about taking that attention and that approach to, you know, the texture and scale of somebody walking by the building. So this provides a little hint of that.
Yeah.
But can you do something to break down the scale so it's not, you know, at that, if you zoom in to where those 3 people are standing there,
Yeah.
you know, that's what I'd like to better understand on a street that, as everybody has commented, you know, you showed on a floor plan, a diagram indicating, and as Commissioner Morris said, this is a pathway for people to come to the campus, to enter the building from Massachusetts Avenue. So, you know, this is an opportunity for the architecture to create some interest and texture in conjunction with the landscape architecture that is a little bit more approachable.
Okay. And I think
You,
what we're studying actually is what this becomes right now. And that's a presentation, an internal presentation that we're working on that might, your comment might influence that in a beneficial way.
yeah, I mean, just to focus on this, and then I'd like to continue on the journey around the building if we could, but I would like to come in on this. It's a space that, as we've all said, and I think you can agree, is not the most active side of the building. I'm not so sure that the Husky signs, as even if it's beloved, that it does much in terms of activating that edge. I wonder about sort of traveling behind it, traveling in front of it. It doesn't quite, I mean, I think there's so many elegant things about the building, truly. But I'm not so sure that this adds to that. I don't know what it would be. I don't know whether or not, you know, just seating or something else, but this seems to, in a way, to me, kind of bring out the solidity of the base of the building. In other words, it's still something that kind of pushes you out. But I actually care less than that about that than I do about the elevations. And so could we continue that journey around? So where the service area is, for instance?
On the backside?
Yeah.
Yes. So this is on the alley side, I should say.
Yeah.
So we've expanded this substantially. A long time ago, there were, maybe even before BCDC, there were comments about how to serve this building. And we had at that time actually had service on off of Gainsborough. So we've actually gone to great lengths to make this fit. So down here are loading docks that access the existing alley, but the alley has been expanded, I think, 10 or 12 feet. I'm sorry, I don't have that number right now. Really allowing that to the turning radii to work and to give a better buffer as well. So there's several access points in this. There is the Eversource. Sorry, is that the right city? Boston's Eversource. There's Eversource access here, as well as a bike room, a scooter room. And then down here are the loading docks, which are obviously substantial for, not used super often, but are substantial for event spaces. Above that, there are mechanical zones, as well as coaches' offices and hockey offices in this zone as well.
So at night, will this be lit? I mean, because a lot of the strength of this building at night comes from the interior uses, right? That kind of, the building kind of flips at night.
Right.
So these are not anything that will be lit. They're just basically, well, what are they?
Those are louvers. I mean, there are louvers. So I mean, we have some elsewhere as well.
Mechanical louvers.
Mechanical louvers, yes.
Okay.
And then this is hockey offices, as well as some conference rooms in the center zone.
Okay. So let's go back to the elevation from here that everybody's been talking about.
This
Yeah.
one? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's so tough about this view, and I'm sorry, I keep trying to,
That's
there
okay.
we go. The thing that's so tough about this is kind of the weight of this whole thing. Like you've gone to so much trouble to, and I think to good effect, right, of making this sort of a welcoming, but it's sort of like this almost negates what's happening over here because it's so heavy. And I don't know what you can do about that, but there was a view of this edge. It might have been this slide.
John?
This slide, I think.
That's the previous one, but we can look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, where you start to see it peek through?
Yeah, where you start to see this building down. Now, surface areas are never, right, going to be great. But I think that the building is not just red here, it's this whole thing.
Mhm.
And so anything that you can do to kind of make it feel like this part of the facade is pulled into the motion
Yeah.
that you have everywhere else, I think it would help it. And while that corner nighttime view is dramatic, it doesn't do you any favors in terms of making this feel like a really foreboding place. And this just may be the drama that you're showing and the highlighting of the building itself. But I don't know that, like, if I were walking down there and I saw that big black edge or undefined edge, I guess, I'm not so sure I'd feel great about walking there. Right.
Talking about this edge?
Well, this, right? Go back to the nighttime view.
Yep.
That whole area.
Okay. Yeah. And certainly there's. Okay, we could look at that. And there is obviously some rendering issues with ambient light and everything, but I appreciate that. I mean, drawing some of that language that you saw previously and sort of bringing it in, that could make some difference in this particular view, as well as the one that's a little bit farther out.
Yeah.
Brian,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask you to remind us. I know most of that is back of house and loading further down, but did you say there's access to the bike room and some other key things at the edge?
Yeah, there's some weird sectional things happening to make this work, but there is a sloped pathway, but there is a bike room back here. There is the Eversource room. There is the actual Eversource room raised above for flooding mitigation, and then there's mechanical room here. But this is the hockey offices all the way to here.
So if it's nighttime, or for that matter, anytime, to get to your bike here, what do you have to do?
There's a pathway
downhill.
Sorry, there's a pathway. I think I think we were able to keep it level at this height, and then there's a railing that goes down.
And where is the actual? Can you point to the actual building entrance? I'm still
over here.
I've been toggling
over there.
It's around the corner.
So it's around. So that seems a little contradictory. That on the one hand, you want to be inviting people into the building. You want to help provide visual cues to help somebody understand where I can enter, and then the entrance itself is sort of hidden. And I think I've been toggling back and forth between the draft presentation and the floor plan. That's something that would be really helpful to see as we look at it. Is specifically, can you zoom in to what is on like a ground floor plan, so we can see in detail where the entrances are, what's actually happening?
This is partial ground floor plan. Because this is sectionally, this lobby plan for both lobbies is very complex, actually, because for instance, there's a 4'3", I believe, grade change between this lobby and this lobby. The event level, which we're actually maintaining as existing, is I believe 11 feet below this main lobby. So sectionally, there's a lot going on at these entry points. This is the Eversource, and here's the, sorry, it's kind of a difficult, these particular areas, I don't even know if we have the plans to explain it because of the complexities of the section.
So that had looked like that previous one had the bike storage in it.
Yep.
So it's just, I guess one thing is,
where is the bike? I'm sorry, I don't quite understand how the bike works. This is an upper.
In here. So
level.
you can walk down to, is that even right? Help me out here, Stephen.
I'd go back one, Brian. I think it's behind the fin. Do you see it?
Yeah, no, that's the Eversource. That's Eversource.
That's Eversource. Okay.
Yep. So is this the bike room?
Brian, you had it correct. That
Right
was it.
there, yeah.
You walk down this.
The bike room is down
the
there,
sidewalk.
I thought sectionally there was something even funkier happening, but you walk down the sidewalk against the building to the to this room, the vestibule bike room.
so if my bike is in there, that's actually where I have to walk. So I think that further.
Those are for
emphasis.
people working in the building and staff, right? It's not
Or
the, right.
But still, if
Yeah.
you're working in the building and you've worked late or there's a late game and you're coming to retrieve your bike, you're going in through the building, right? And then exiting out that way or whatever.
Mhm.
Yep.
Is there bikes
This-
for students or visitors?
Those would be out in the street, the stand, the city bike racks like you'd find elsewhere on public areas.
You don't have any interior for students or visitors?
It would be that bike room.
So looking at this plan again, where you have the, and actually, thank you for explaining the 4 entries. That's very, that was very helpful for me. So I've got the Gainsborough, St Botolph, the recreational entry, auxiliary, and east entry. I think it's what is, I think what's becoming clear to me again is this is sort of very conceptual in terms of where they're, in terms of how you illustrate where they are. And then there's that, when I am on the street trying to enter the building, where are the doors? Where are the visual signals that draw me closer and then help me understand where to enter the building? And I'm sorry, I'm being a little vague, but I'm just, I guess what's becoming clear to me is sort of the challenge of, what makes it, a successful kind of civic experience, or a civic environment is, how we help orient people and guide them to key entries of buildings. And I appreciate your walking us through, because I think also there's the tension between the queuing for an event, which you've clearly spent a lot of time, but then also how does this building contribute to the public environment, the campus environment of the university, the civic environment of the city, to help people navigate their way from place to place.
If I could just chime in, I'm Corey Berg, Director of Campus Planning. Just back to your point, Anne Marie, about the entries. You're right in that we spent a lot of time thinking about the queuing, but also I think looked at how our arena is used today, and trying to avoid some of maybe what's happening today where people are queuing on the street. And so that's why I think pushing those pedestrians back, having the multiple entry points is really important. Right now, we do have a separate kind of student entrance in our existing arena, which we're trying to replicate here in that east entry access point. So that's really not intended, I think, for the general public, but trying to recreate what we've got now, where we've got students kind of flowing into what we call the doghouse, the student section, and trying to push the pedestrians, the general kind of guests and general kind of attendees to that west entry, so that we aren't having them spill off onto the road and kind of what we've got right now, which is kind of people everywhere. So I think that separation is really important. But I think our challenge is, how do you make the east entry appear welcoming from the street? But we really don't want the general public kind of going in there. We really do want to kind of separate out flows of people if we can. So I think everyone's kind of hitting on that challenge.
I think, again, we've obviously tried to use transparency, particularly the lower, I'll say 1.5 or 20 feet or so, as an opportunity to see through the building and understand a little bit better in that corner.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. I think that's really helpful. And I could see if you had that entrance on the corner, let's say, that it would start to create kind of a bee's nest.
Yeah, it's not safe, right? I mean, that's what we heard as a condition that they're dealing with right now with a sort of ceremonial entrance.
So I do think, but I do think if we're gonna stick with this corner, I truly think that you should think about that entrance to the bike room. That feels unsafe to me.
Yep.
And then also see how you can integrate that facade, the alley facade, so that it starts to feel like it's part of that corner, like the motion of the building. I mean, there's really some just amazing things going on in this building. And I just, there's always like a facade or a part of your design that's just not quite there. And you kind of, as a designer, it, but you're so busy paying attention to other things that it may slip. There was one other thing. What was it? Oh, the landscape. Can we look at that? That's good. Let's look at that.
The plan?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, let's start with this perspective. Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm not sure how the queuing works in here. So you have.
We can zoom into this. Maybe it'll help.
No, I do understand that, but in the 3 dimensions, sort of, you have queuing that's here and queuing that's here. Do I have that right? In other words, I guess
there's 6 lanes of queuing that happens between the glass and the inside face of the column.
Okay.
And that goes around. That's why there's directional benches to allow circulation around that.
Oh, I see. So, got it. So it's basically you're circling back. It's like at the airport.
Yeah, it's an L. No, it's actually 6 lanes that are L's. That's why we actually, I think.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Got it.
Yep.
Yep. A pair going into each door, sort of. Yep. And then I wonder about the scale of the benches. Whether or not these are all the same size right now. Is that correct?
Yes, they are, Laura.
I just wonder if you could, just study whether or not they're, particularly on this side. I actually I get totally why you're doing this, but on this side, whether or not they're, particularly along this edge, which is going to connect to that corner, and you have that entrance back there. I wonder if there is a way to think about the benches in terms of scale, like public scale, on the public side of the columns. It's a little hard for me to tell. Maybe we should go to the plan.
Or Brian, maybe you can click, if you go to maybe the next one after this, just to see.
This one?
Yes, I think this
one. Yeah,
this one. Yeah, I think one of the things we were trying to do here, Laura, and I hear your comment, and I think it's very helpful. It was, we went down a road of could we do anything with movable furniture, which doesn't work programmatically. But this is the idea of, can it feel like a living room with a few of these kind of, 2-sided things that still allow a lot of porosity for people to move around them without having them too big, because the fixed benches, those are, they vary in scale, but they are really kind of something that you have to move around. So we wanted to break it down and have the pods be a little bit more like, a love seat or something that is a little bit smaller, that can have that kind of grouping to it in various places, but still allow movement around them.
Yeah, and you're starting to see that kind of outdoor space, right? Like that's a perfect one where you have this little pod, right? That people go together. But maybe, sometimes it's nice to have a long sofa, if you will, with a shorter. I just wonder if there's more variety in there so that it's not just a love seat for each one. I myself find love seats annoying, but
yeah, I know what you
that
mean.
has nothing to do with what you're doing.
I think that makes sense. We can take a look at that, Laura. I think one of the things that you'll appreciate we have been really challenged with is maintaining porosity of flow.
Oh, yeah.
The door and all of these sides. And then we have the columns and other things, but it's a really great comment. And I think we'll definitely take that in consideration and see if there is like a jump in scale and something that feels a little bit different, maybe particularly in that corner.
And not all of them. Right? Not all of them, just some of them, so that there's a little variety. And I appreciate that you didn't line up the benches parallel with the street, that in fact you're sort of giving people a skewed view both ways. Much nicer. And then
it's very helpful.
Then street trees, are those just question, the spacing of those, are those per a city standard, or sort of where did that come from?
We've actually played with it to have it more relate to the activity. It's not a universal thing. So we've grouped them, and then they've opened up in certain places where we're trying to, like, if you can look on St Botolph Street, the trees are a little more grouped in front of the branding sculpture to make it feel a little bit more like a room there. Then it opens up a bit. And we're doing the same thing along Gainsborough. They're not an even spacing of the trees. They're, a columnar variety. There's something we've had to, look very closely for things that can deal with our narrow kind of space, but that it's not a consistent spacing. As in the existing ones across the street are slightly not consistent either.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just wonder if you can push it a little further, like, do all the trees have to, you kind of got a consistency, right? And then you have a break, but I'm wondering, like beads on a string, whether or not you can have some, that are together, and it's, I guess I would study this whole thing in terms of what the views are. But if you can see, it's like pearls on a necklace, right? But they don't have to be so evenly spaced. Maybe like the building, they would add a dynamic aspect to it if they're not just this column. And you may play with it in terms of like light or, something like that. So I am never somebody that thinks that trees need to be perfectly spaced on cities, because there are obstacles to go around, right? And if one goes away, then you've like wrecked your whole idea of having this really strong line. So just a thought.
No, that's a great thought. I think we're trying to be so respectful to still the ones that we are grouping, that the canopy has room, but I think that's a great point. We can study that a bit more.
And Laura, if you're done with that line, I'd like to maybe return to a theme that Anne Marie brought up earlier.
Sure, I'm all done. Great.
And this goes to some of Anne Marie's initial questions and comments relating to, I think, scale and texture and materiality. And I think the project has come a long way from its initial showing, while still, maintaining the diagram, maintaining, I think, the strength of the form and the clarity of it, which I think is a great strength to this. But I think, as we've discussed before, and the commissioners have brought up multiple times, it's that sort of secondary and tertiary layers of additional texture in the materiality. You're doing some beautiful, what looks like is going to be some beautiful work with the brick, right, at key moments to help set scale on the larger portions, on the upper portions of the building, and then also moments where that brick comes down to ground. And we saw that perspective view of the rounded stair corner coming down. I believe the close-in view, not this corner, but the other corner of that stair on St. Botolph. Yeah. Where that texture actually came to where people would be walking. And I thought that was a really, really nice moment where the mass of the whole thing starts to have a scale that's, I don't know if the general public would do this, but I would do this. I would walk up to that wall and touch it, right? And feel the brick and understand the scale. And I think that's a nice moment where it comes down to the ground. I know it can't come down everywhere, but I think, it's these types of moves and the questioning earlier of, and, I think we're all anxious to see the interpretive wall, what happens there and how that, becomes a pedestrian scale that you want to be up against and interact with. And if it's not, the moment of the interactive zone, it's that corner moment where the brick does come down and it's not as sleek. And I noticed that you've introduced, a sort of champagne or brownish fin right here, and you were alternating it to create, again, this sort of more variety and texture and that clear story there. And yet, when we looked over at the main entry lobby, those all appear at least to be sort of standard, 4 foot on center, black curtain wall, window wall, mullion systems. And so we're seeing in this image, right, the underside of the overhang is a sort of champagne. And I know you're doing a mirrored overhang at the entrance to play up the activity that we're going to see. But I guess, there seems to be, what I'm getting at is there's this effort to sort of warm it up, add texture, add a variety of details of scale, right? So that it's not just that clear story isn't just a march of the same champagne colored fin. You alternated it, right? Begins to get some complexity in there, which I think is really promising. And then I see this and I wonder why you didn't sort of begin to really do that in this most public of moments, right? Understanding that you want to keep it simple, but also how do you warm it up, particularly with the reflective ceiling, which has its own dynamic. In some of the cuts on the upper levels, it seems like the fins are champagne. In other ones, it doesn't seem like there are any.
There are.
There are black, and undercuts they're champagne. So I'm trying to understand the sort of logic as it's deployed throughout the building, and how you might be able to take it one step further to sort of keep the integrity of your diagram, which is great, and just add this extra layer that really then grounds it and helps relate it to the pedestrian and the context, to the materiality that I think Anne Marie was talking about at the start.
Yeah, and I'll explain the rationale for this. We see this as more of a massing scale move, this particular one, and this is another one of those punch languages. However, performatively, we wanted to have some fins, and there was a desire to warm up, particularly that main view, or we consider the main view from this corner. So we have, because there were fins there, we wanted to really bring some warmth there and highlight that entry point. We are currently looking at whether or not these fins are actually required. I mean, more consistently, we probably wouldn't need those, and we're studying that from a cost and environmental, whether we need to add more aluminum to the project from a series of reasons. But we're trying to keep this as more of a massing move, and this is a punch within that. That's the logic. All of these have, you can see showing up here, the champagne elements in the punches. And we're trying to differentiate for sort of a massing shift versus something within a facade. And they'll say the same is true. I don't think I have for here. We can go to here. So all of the punches along St. Botolph, as they've been, they're framed three-sided with this champagne, which the brick sort of curves in and allows that soft transition to the window. Now here's a better view of that. So the massing moves do not have the champagne. That's the intent.
But, and I think, again, just to reiterate, how you translate, because I really do like those moves. How can you translate those to the ground plane? How can you translate them to use Seth's comment about, what does it mean for me when I'm walking up against it? And how, because that's part of the interest of the texture of a city like Boston. There's a variety of different textures. We don't have as many, things aren't monolithic. I think that's what draws humans to, to textures and buildings. So just how can you take these moves and, almost do, as a design exercise, zoom in on that first floor, the first story or two that a pedestrian walking along the street is likely to see, because you are not, as lovely as this is as a composition, it's unlikely you can actually see that. Any of us could ever see that. But how can you take that artistry that you brought to this elevation down to those smaller scale experiences? And how also can you take the comment Laura made about don't have the street trees march along and be evenly spaced. How can you introduce some of that creativity and, vibrancy to the experience of somebody walking along the street, along this building, because it is a huge structure. So I think, again, that's part of the beauty of your project and your design, is this texture that you're introducing. So how can you take that to the, not the scale? I'm trying to think about, I feel like there's an intermediate scale that if you could add that, particularly at the base of the building, would give it an additional richness that would help to address some of the, concerns we're raising. And I think may also help to answer or provide some guidance as to how do you address the issue of the entrances, because maybe that's the piece too. Is there another layer of design or scale of design that is specific to building entrances? How can you take the language you've created but specifically design building entrances? Because right now they feel, I don't feel like there's a building entrance design. It's just part of the building as a whole.
Well, we've developed, I'll just give my response whether you agree or not. We've developed a language where this interior and even the St. Botolph metal panel is something that has a sheen to it, it's metal. And we're bringing that through. You can see it come through the exterior and pierce that. And we're doing something similar, as I mentioned, on the northeast corner, but you can see a little bit here. So we're looking for the next level of branding opportunity to address the idea of entry. Now, I do understand that maybe this curtain wall could be something a little bit more engaging, and we can certainly look at that. We are pinched for, a lot of this is we're obviously very pinched for site dimension, just programmatically, but looking for subtle variations, I think we could certainly try to work on.
I think it was the east entry, correct? That we were we
This one.
spent a lot of time talking about that. Yes. So I think entry, I guess building entry for me, it's more than a curtain wall.
Yeah.
And it's more than relying on light. You've made a compelling argument for how the building will come alive at night.
Uh-huh.
But I think there's just another layer of design and design exploration that could help to address, help to address and answer some of the issues we've been raising or concerns we've been raising about, particularly this corner of the building.
Yep.
So commissioners, we've been debating or discussing for about an hour. Are there other key threads we want to jump into before I solicit any public testimony? Okay, so Brian, if you don't mind just going to the cover, as I don't have slides with me today.
I'm sorry, Seth, I was on mute.
Oh, sorry,
Do you
Laura,
mind if I
please,
just
go
say
ahead.
something quickly? So Brian, when you first presented this building to us and you were looking at this iron spot brick.
Yep.
And I think we had talked about whether or not there would be a blend of the different iron spot, right? Because there are blends that are kind of close together, but there are ranges. Did you ever study or think about in the areas where you've done the texture, which are really beautiful, whether or not those would be further enhanced by, you know, putting in 20% of a different blend or anything like that?
We looked at a number of options with different brick colors and presented those and discussed those with the university. We all, I think all, but certainly our position as a group is to still, we like this the most. We think it's the most appropriate for the project. We did look at that though.
Okay.
I will say the one thing I want to look at with a mock-up is whether or not there's actually a different texture on what we're calling the outies. But it's going to be subtle, but it will provide a little bit more differentiation. We're looking at that in a I'll call it tabletop mock-up. Because right now there's a smooth finish to achieve the sheen that we've been talking about.
Yep.
If we went with, for say, a velour, there might be a slight variation, and whether or not it's actually worth it, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I hear you. I just couldn't remember whether or not you had studied that.
Yep.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Seth, just one other question. Dare I ask where you've all landed in relocating the arch that presently is located on St. Botolph?
We have.
We haven't landed yet. Where we have a number of options that we're getting ready to bring to the Landmarks Commission. We're taking them to our president later this week to see if he has any strong opinions, so we can share that when we go. So yes, we have a number of options that are
Great.
different.
That's good to
So
hear. Look forward to
we look
seeing.
forward to it. Yeah.
Okay, so at this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and I will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep comments to 2 minutes. And so I'm looking to see if there's any public testimony. I do see a hand raised. Allison, are you able to unmute yourself?
Thank you, Allison Coltonis. A question related again to the entrances and thinking about the Orange Line platform and getting off at the end of the platform near Gainsborough Street and then walking to the public entry for the building and what that walk is going to be like. I thought I had heard that there would be improvements to the MBTA infrastructure there, but I didn't see that in the presentation. But if that turns out to be the more frequently used route to the building, then it's definitely worth improving how that feels. I mean, obviously there's a ramp and stairs there now, but it doesn't feel very inviting. So just a thought about access. I mean, obviously from Mass Ave, people coming on the #1 bus would be walking down St. Botolph Street, but if they're on the Orange Line, they could use the end of the platform there. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Is there any additional public comment? Okay, so at this point, I'd like to close the public comment period. I don't know if the team wants to talk briefly about the planned improvements of that the project is proposing at that connection between Gainsborough and the T, and then what we understand the T to be providing, just to clarify the intent there.
No, the team is in close contact with the MBTA about when and if their plans for the Mass Ave station are going to change, and we're coordinating with them because it's obviously going to be important to the success of the project.
And Kathy, is it fair to say that, you know, our understanding right now is that the plan is to renovate the existing stair and ramp that's there by the T and turn that into a full access and
Yes,
on the station?
yes, but it is not clear to me that the funding for the T to make the changes that they're going to make is actually in place. So a lot of it's going to be timing.
Right.
Yeah.
But everything in our design accounts for that. And so there's nothing in our design that would kind of prevent that. It'll all kind of jive together.
Okay, great. Commissioners, thoughts on next steps here? And this is just a reminder, this is a subcommittee, so there's no formal roll vote being taken. We're looking for thoughts on next steps relative to bringing back to full commission, potentially.
It seems that there's a few things to keep working on. What I heard were entrances and design of entrances, trees and landscaping and groupings of or how trees are deployed, and also the further refinement to the extent possible of the entrance and gateway at St Botolph to the building. There may be others that fellow commissioners should add to that, but it seems to me that these are all things that might be worked on, Seth, through at a staff level as further refinements to final. But it seems to me we've taken this about as far as we're going to take it, I think, at committee. How do my fellow commissioners feel about that?
You did wonderful.
Yeah,
Are there other things missing, though? I just want to make sure that I didn't, in the things that I captured, that I caught what everyone thinks needs further refinement.
Kathy, did that include the stretch where the Husky sign is?
I don't know that I captured that adequately, so
Okay.
say more.
Yeah, I think what's happening on that edge relative to the amount of activity, as well as I think that Anne Marie had some good suggestions about what the base of that building might be, that there might be, you know, you might feel like leaning up against that because of the textures or the warmness of it. And, you know, whether or not there are other landscape improvements along there too, recognizing that those are important queuing spaces.
Others?
Yeah, I think I would add, you know, I guess in this case, I would defer to staff in terms of next steps and reviewing. I'm sorry, I just keep going back through the draft presentation slides, and there's a slide that refers to design drivers, facade strategy, and it's got continuity, facade continuity, fenestration aperture, texture activation. And again, it's all, you know, looking at this very large building as a whole. So I think as this moves forward, really, it will be important to help us understand how does that apply, again, to that first story, to say the ground level in the experience. How does it relate to what's happening inside the building? It became really clear to me in the discussion about it is a complex building in terms of navigating, you know, a change in grade, what's happening inside and outside. So I think it's going to be very important when you come back to us to be very clearly communicate these, help us understand how this works, because it is, our purview is the public realm. And it seems like these you've done such a nice job of thinking about the building as a whole and as an object, but I think it's going to be very important to help us understand how that attention to design and detail translates to how this building meets the ground, and how we help, guide, how we help people, and how the design helps people navigate the public realm and the building itself.
Okay, thank you all. Very well said. I might add to that, given the timing, that looks like there will be a meeting prior to this coming back to full committee, because this is also tied to the Northeastern IMP, that there will be a meeting with the Office of Historic Preservation and Landmarks staff to discuss some other features that may find their way into the design. So I think that could be something that is looked at final committee as well. So hearing no additional comments at this time, and in lieu of a formal vote, commissioners, it is my understanding that the proposed project is recommended for final consideration and a vote of recommendation with the not formal provisos, but informal provisos that all the sort of design content and work that we talked about today continues to advance, and we see some good progress at that for final commission.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Well, I think that concludes our presentation and session this evening. Commissioners, as always, thank you for your time and energy. Public, thank you for attending, and to the proponent team as well for making this investment and time and effort and creating a better design outcome for both Northeastern and for the city of Boston. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye.